Good evening, everyone. Welcome to my weekly live stream of doing some development work on Node-RED. This is my weekly hour or so spending some time in the depths of the Node-RED codebase doing some development work on the project itself rather than using Node-RED. If it's your first time watching the live stream, do say hi in the chat. If it's not, please do come and say hi. Welcome. If you're watching on YouTube, on the replay, do drop in a comment and say hi. So I do these streams, if you're watching the replay, these streams are 8 p.m. UK time every Monday, give or take. And yeah, just a bit of fun to spend some time working on something. See in the chat, welcome Jim Bob Squelchy, good to have you. So I hope these are useful streaming. I enjoy them. They sort of give me an excuse just to slow down a bit and just step through what I'm working on, explain what we're doing, hopefully be useful for people who are just interested in seeing how Node-RED works or how I develop Node-RED. If there's ever anything in particular you're interested in seeing, do leave a comment, do join the chat, do let me know. This week, so most weeks I try and have something sort of lined up, relatively self-contained, that I can fit into the rough hour or so from beginning to end. And it usually works quite well. This week, I have to say, for most of today, I've been deep in some new code development work that I've sort of not given myself the time today to lift myself out of to figure out what I'm going to be exactly covering on this live stream. So I thought I'd spend a bit of time. Actually might be useful just to go through the work I'm currently doing. Whether I actually get more code written tonight, I don't know, but I think it would be instructive to sort of share what I'm working on. And like I said at the start, it's useful for me sometimes just to take that step back and talk through what I'm doing, because sometimes that helps unblock. And I have to admit, this bit of work I'm on at the moment, there's some hard stuff. I mean, conceptually it's fairly easy. Getting it to fit into the existing code base is proving, just needs some care as we go. So what are we doing? So this all revolves around Subflow Modules. Now, if you're a Node-RED user, you'll be familiar with Subflows, where you can effectively create a custom node in your palette that is implemented as a flow. What we're adding support in the future, whether it's 1.3 or 2.0, I don't know. It kind of depends on the progress I'm able to make on the bit I'm on at the moment. What we're working towards is being able to publish subflows to npm as proper node modules, so that other people can then install those subflows into their runtime just like any other node. And once it's been installed, you as a user of that node, of the module that's been installed, you don't know it's a subflow. There might be little clues. There'll be certain things you can't do with that sort of node, but it will look and feel like most other nodes in the palette. You won't be able to edit the node to see the subflow underneath it. That's all hidden in the runtime. So it's going to be another way to help people create nodes and share them, trying to live up to the low code model that Node-RED supports. There's quite a lot of work going on to make this hang together, and a lot of the basic stuff is already there. So we've got somewhere in here So there's a draft pull request that's been open for a couple months now, that adds the basic support for Subflow modules. So given an npm module that takes a particular shape, and I will take you through what the contents of that module has to look like, then you can npm install it, and the editor will load it and it will work. It works. The runtime instantiates the subflow, creates the flows under the cover. Yeah, and it all just works. Now, as a feature, it's quite simple to get. Well, I say it's quite simple. It was a bunch of work to get this working, to get this far. But it's pretty solid, and it works well. But there's edge cases. Edge cases are the bane of my life on this feature. And it's a particular set of edge cases that I'm currently working on. Just seeing Wiz Radical's question in the chat. Do you expect to see much performance difference or extra overhead between that implementation versus a standard subflow? Performance-wise, there is next to no difference once it's running between a subflow that's part of the user's flows and a node that's been implemented as a subflow, because from a runtime module, from the runtime aspect, we still instantiate, in fact, exactly the same object. It's just, where has the flow information come from? Has it come from the user's flow, or has it come from the npm module? Where has the definition of the contents of the subflow come from? That's the only difference. Once it's got the subflow definition, it still instantiates it just like it does today for subflows that are in your flow. So that will be largely unchanged. It's always going to be the case that a flow inherently contains overheads that a node implemented in pure JavaScript just doesn't have. So, this is always going to be the trade-off between doing something purely in Node-RED versus writing the code. That's kind of where we're at. So, in fact, let me start with what does a subflow node module actually look like? Because to be honest, I think if I were to dive into the code I'm working on at the moment, I would lose you. I'd lose myself pretty quickly. So, what we have is, I don't know if you can make out, I have a test subflow module. So it has a package.json. And the package.json looks just like a package.json of a regular npm module. Let me make it bigger so you can see. There is this new thing, this dependency section under the Node-RED section. That's related to what I'm working on right now, and so ignore that for the moment. But other than that, this file is just an absolutely standard package.json. And if you're familiar with how nodes are defined, in the package.json there is a Node-RED section with a nodes property, and then a list of the node files that provide Node-RED nodes. And here I've got one called test subflow, provided by subflow.js. So we go look at subflow.js, and this contains this boilerplate piece of JavaScript code. So let's break down what this is doing. Yeah, that's okay. This is just hacked together, but you'll notice, again, if you're familiar with how NPM nodes are structured, you have a JavaScript file, and for every JavaScript file, you have an HTML file. Well, for a Subflow node, you don't have the HTML file. You just have the JavaScript. So we've got the JavaScript and we've got a subflow.json file. So this is the flow JSON for the Subflow. It's a slightly modified version of what you can export from the editor. And okay, so this is one of the outstanding questions in the design, is the exact format we want this JSON to take. But essentially, it's the Subflow node at the top level, which has all its properties, all its definition, with this extra property called flow, which is then the array of all the nodes inside the Subflow. Okay, so that's the JSON. And what the JavaScript does is it loads in the JSON, parses it to an object, and then it calls red.nodes.register subflow. So this is a new API. You can register Subflow just by passing it in the parse JSON of the Subflow. And just like you would register a node with the runtime, this is how you register a Subflow node with the runtime. And that's all it is. So in fact, this JavaScript is completely boilerplate. We did contemplate, well, from the package.json, why don't we just point straight at the JSON file, subflow.json, and not bother having that boilerplate JavaScript? This is where the NPM terms of use have to be read quite carefully. When we started designing this feature, a couple of years ago, the initial sketch of an idea, the terms of use for NPM were, you could interpret it to understand that modules you publish to NPM had to contain functional JavaScript code, which is kind of reasonable. It's a repository for JavaScript modules. That's why in this design, we ensure we have got some functional JavaScript, even though it's completely boilerplate. We have got some JavaScript. Now, interestingly, they've updated their terms of use since the GitHub acquisition, and Microsoft, since they've been acquired, the terms of use have been updated, and the language has changed around it. They still don't want you using it as a storage file repository, which we're not. But it's got, and the modules have to be related to the Node ecosystem. The language is loosened in terms of having a strict requirement to containing JavaScript. Either way, it's not really a battle we want. So, this is the design approach we're taking. So in our testing, I've got this package. I can run npm pack, and it generates the tgz file, which could be published to npm, or I can just install that locally myself. Let me just check what branch of the code I'm on. SF yeah, okay, we're good. So so there's no HTML file. And the reason there's no HTML file is because all of the metadata that would belong in the HTML file, we can actually completely auto-generate from the Subflow definition itself, because the Subflow definition has got information about icon, color, inputs, outputs, all the usual gubbins that belong in the node's HTML definition. We can automatically generate that. Hey, Softy2K, glad to see you join us. So in the registry, when you call register subflow, it now comes in to this new file, which auto-generates the HTML template for this node inserting in all the stuff we've extracted out of the subflow definition, including the on-edit prepare and on-edit save to handle all the custom subflow properties. Need to do stuff around help. That's an outstanding item, actually, which I don't think I've got listed somewhere. But yeah, we'll grab the info from the subflow and present that as the help for the node. Yeah. So that's what we do when we load it. In the editor itself, then there's another pull request which I raised a couple of days ago. So when you're actually editing a subflow, so this is before you've published it, we've added this new pane of options for the subflow where you can give a npm module name, a version number, description, license, your author and keywords, basically all the information that you would want in the package.json. So if you were maintaining a subflow that you publish to npm, you can actually attach all of this information and that gets saved in your flow file. And we will provide, through some mechanism, some tooling, that you would then be able to generate the npm package from the subflow definition. But the goal is to have all that information tied in to the subflow. Okay, so that's all well and good. In fact, for completeness, have I... yeah, I don't actually have it currently installed because of the other stuff I'm working on at the moment. So that's all good. You can npm install a subflow module and it will get loaded. Now, the problem comes when you have dependencies. So let's say you have your subflow contains the random node, as in node-red node random, so a non-core node. When you npm install that, if you do it on the command line, npm, since like npm version 4 maybe, will try and put dependencies at the top level of the node modules folder. And it's the top level of the node modules folder that Node-RED will scan when it's looking for nodes when it starts up. So if I just show you what I mean by that, let's just try and do this all in the right order. So if I'm in my .node-red directory and I npm install this module from its tgz file, make this a bit bigger. Hold on. So if we look at my package.json file in my .node-red directory, I've got a whole bunch of stuff in here that I'm working on, but you can see test subflow module has been installed, and because I installed it from a local tgz, it's just symlinked it. It's not symlinked it, it's recorded exactly where the tgz file came from that it's installed. And if I just show you again, bring back up the package.json, you can see I had listed as a dependency node-red node random. So if I go into, so if I run npm list node-red node random, you can see node-red node random is installed because it is a dependency of test subflow module. And if I go into the node modules directory, we should find, well, not doing that. So node-red node random has been installed. It hasn't been installed underneath the test subflow module. It's been installed at the top level. So if I restart Node-RED, do it the quick way. Oh no, Do it the slow way. Just wait for the build to run. So that's now started up. You'll notice I've got a whole bunch of extra debug spinning up, which is what I'm working on at the moment. If we reload the editor, you can see I have my Subflow module, the say hi node, which, let me just double check, because I don't think, yeah, so it doesn't get any help text, but you know, I can edit it, and this is, you know, all the Subflow properties that were defined in the Subflow. That's all working. Anyway, that exists, but you'll notice I've also got the random node has been installed. So because we installed it from the command line and then restarted Node-RED, Node-RED has discovered the random node just like all the other nodes, and it's been included. So that's good. The problem came when, if we now remove test subflow module, okay, and then run npm list node-red node random again, it's empty. So we removed the module that brought in node-red node random. So npm has removed node-red node random because nothing depends on it anymore. Okay, let's restart Node-RED. Reload. So you can see I don't have my say hi subflow, and the random node isn't there anymore. I've uninstalled them, that's to be expected. What I'm now going to do is go back up my history and hopefully, so this is, I'm going to do an HTTP request to the admin API to install the test subflow module using its tgz file as a local file. So what's different about this is we're, just like the palette manager would, if you use that in the editor, we're getting the runtime to dynamically add this node to the runtime. So let's make everything a little bigger. Right, so if I run that install, let's look through what it's done. So it got the event that I wanted to install it. It's successfully installed test subflow module, and code I've been working on today has identified that the test subflow module has a dependency on another Node-RED node module. And so not only has it gone and then loaded test subflow module, the one we've asked it to install, it's also then loaded that other module because it's we need it loaded into the runtime in order for that subflow to work. So then it successfully registered both the types, the type coming from the subflow module and the type coming from the random node. And if I go back to the editor, you can see it's down the bottom now because it's been loaded, added on. There's the subflow module has been added, and come down and the random node has been added. So that's addressed one problem with the code in the existing pull request. So the subflow can now depend on other Node-RED node modules. And the way it does that is because these dependencies could be, they wouldn't necessarily just be Node-RED nodes. These could be any npm module. We can't assume they are all Node-RED nodes to be loaded. So what the current thinking is, and when I say the current thinking, as in, since 10 o'clock this morning when I started looking at this, fixing this, is adding in under the Node-RED section, a second dependencies property, which then would list out, these are the modules that, the Node-RED modules that we depend on. So there's a bit of a smell here that it's duplicating information. But for now, this is the approach. At least it's enough of an approach for me to develop against, and we may refine it. We'll see. But because that's there, that's how the runtime knows that if it loads up test subflow module, it needs to make sure it has node-red node random loaded as well. This dependencies will ensure that npm installs it. This one is the one that will ensure the runtime loads it when it's loading this module. So that's all working, and so that's goodness. And now we're getting very close to the bit I've been banging my head against for most of today. And the problem is this. So, hey Ball Geek, good to see you join us. Here's the problem. Let me try and explain it one step at a time. When you install npm modules, when you run npm install, like you can on the command line or like the Node-RED editor does, npm, where am I? npm will update your package.json file to correctly list the npm modules you have installed. So I have installed test subflow module, so that is now listed. But it will only list the dependencies of the modules that you explicitly install. It doesn't add to this list the modules that get pulled in as dependencies deeper in the tree. So you'll see, even though I've got node-red node random loaded in the editor and installed, it is not listed here. And this is how npm works. npm has installed it, and it's taken care of installing node-red node random. And this is part of what the package lock file does for you. If we go look at the package lock file and go find node-red node random, you can see it's here. Let me see. Well, if you dig around in here, you can see test subflow module requires node-red node random. And anyway, all that sort of metadata is there. But this is how npm knows. If I npm remove test subflow, it knows it can safely delete node-red node random, because as far as it's concerned, nothing else is using it. But, and this is the problem I'm grappling with, and I'm 2 or 3 hours into trying to solve, and I'm not going to be solving it in the next 30 minutes for you guys. This is more a show and tell, shall we say, of what I'm working on at the moment. So I've installed the Subflow module, and because we need the random node installed in order to instantiate the Subflow module, it means I've got the random node installed. So there is nothing to stop me saying, oh look, I've installed that Subflow, but I've gained this random node in my palette as well. So let's drag that random node on and start using it. And, suddenly become dependent on node-red node random. Nothing wrong with that. It's a node in my palette. I'm going to start using it. The problem comes from the fact node-red node random isn't part of the record of what you have installed for your node-red application. So if I were to hit, if I hit deploy now, that's no problem. Everything's going to work. It might be tomorrow I'd realize, actually, this say hi module I installed, I'm not using it and I don't want it anymore. So I remove it and I delete it. And npm will delete that module, and it will delete node-red node-random because nothing else from the npm point of view uses it. At which point my flows are broken because npm has removed a node I've started using. Yeah. And this is a problem. And that's the problem. I've been trying to work out the right way to solve it. Now, there are a number of different approaches we could take. And I'm not yet fully settled on what the right approach is. One possible approach is, can we find a way to stop npm from removing that module? So the only way to get npm to stop removing node-red node-random is by ensuring node-red node-random is listed in the top level package.json file. Have it listed in here. Now, that's doable because when we installed test subflow module and we loaded it and we discovered its dependencies and found the modules it had provided, it is feasible for us to automatically append those dependencies to your user's package.json file. So rather than just getting test subflow mod in here, we would then get node-red node-random and others. So that would give you a safety net, if you like. So now in the future, if I removed this subflow module, node-red node-random would stick around because npm would no longer remove it automatically because it's in your package.json. So that would stop you breaking things. The problem with that approach is I can already hear the complaints on the forum that someone installs a module to try it out, they remove it, or they install a module to try it out and it pulls in a dozen third-party nodes. They decide they don't want it and all that noise, so they remove the Subflow module they installed. All those third-party nodes stick around and they have to manually remove all of those nodes. So that's not ideal. That's not entirely pleasant. Yeah, not ideal. So a different approach would be to stop you from uninstalling test subflow mod if we detect you are using one of the dependencies it introduced directly. Dependency in use, whatever it might be. So that's the approach I've spent a couple of hours this afternoon working towards, and it's still some way off. There's a problem with that. There are problems with all these approaches. The problem with that approach is, let's say I install two separate Subflow modules, both depending on node-red node-random. Now npm would be smart enough when I remove one of them to, because I've got two things depending on it, if I remove one, it would leave node-red node-random in place. So me using node-red node-random shouldn't block me from deleting one of those subflows, because deleting that subflow isn't going to delete node-red node-random. It would block me removing the last one. But that then means we've got to keep track of all the dependencies between these different modules, who depends on who and who's used by who. And frankly, I've struggled to try and do that in a clean way in the code. So I'm kind of close to well, I guess that this is one of the reasons I chose to cover this topic tonight, which, we're deep in the weeds of quite hard stuff. But it just seemed a good opportunity for me to take that step back and talk it through and kind of hope that as I try to explain it from first principles to you lot, it will make me realise or make me dawn on me what the better approach might be. Okay, so we have these two different approaches. One, we update the user's package.json file, which means we will leave behind these extra node modules. Pros are it's quite predictable and easy behavior. From an implementation standpoint, there's not a lot of complicated logic needed. We just need to identify those dependencies and make sure they are listed in the user's package.json file. That is very doable, and that will protect us from npm removing those modules unexpectedly. The downside is npm won't remove those modules, which is a downside. So another option would be, so there are variations on that. For example, we could try and remember that this module was introduced by a subflow, and that we do that work to add it to the user's package.json only if they start using it. So if they don't start using it, then we know it's safe to be removed when it's safe to allow it to get removed when the subflow is deleted. The other option, which the route I've been pursuing this afternoon, is try and prevent you uninstalling the subflow if you've started using some of the nodes from its internals. Now, as I talk through them like this, I'm still seeing all manners of edge cases and issues around any one of these approaches. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure which approach to take. To be honest, the one I just spelt out, I paused because I've not really... let's see, it says no way to use the npm tools to select if the package you're removing is the last package with the dependency and only then warn the user. So that's an interesting thought. What does npm list node red node? One of the problems, depending on the npm tools, is they do change their output, and they don't. We would want. Yeah, it's a hard problem. Because what actual npm info, because what we need to be able to do is to, npm info is not going to work because that's, sorry. Is that going to do it? No, to use npm to detect if the package you're removing is the last package with a dependency and only then warn the user. So I don't think there is. Well, is there? It is an interesting thought. And we would try and avoid relying on npm too much. In part, just as I say, the way they change their behavior occasionally between major releases. But the problem comes because when it comes to uninstall time, the user has requested us to uninstall the Subflow module. And it's only because we know the npm behavior that we couldn't spot the fact that that's going to cause the random node to also be removed. So we have to, that was an hour this afternoon, was in that scenario, when we remove the subflow module, we know we've got to also remove the runtime node, the random node from the runtime, because npm is going to get rid of it. And we can't stop it getting rid of it because it's not in the package.json. Like I said, the hard part is knowing to go down that route, and this is the route I've been trying to go down, is trying to keep track of if someone asks us to remove node-red node random, we have to fail that request because it's depended on by the subflow node. So we have to solve that problem. So the random node needs to know it's used by the subflow module. And potentially the random node needs to know it's used by a dozen different subflow modules. So in fact, we already have, that's a problem that we already need to address. Like I said, there are just so many edge cases and going around in circles. It's fun stuff. But the net of it is, and the other aspect, which I've not even touched on, is versions. So you have a subflow that requires node-red node random version 1 and a different subflow that requires node-red node random version 2. Well, npm will do the right thing. It will install the two different versions in two different node modules directories. However, the runtime can't load two different versions of one node. It's going to just load the first one it finds, or the first one it's asked to load. So that's another headache that I don't think we are going to have a good answer for. I think there'll be certain patterns we will recommend for versioning of dependencies inside subflows, that they have to be very liberal, otherwise you do certainly risk getting caught up with dependency nightmare. It's one of those features of it always sounded a good idea at the start, being able to publish subflow modules to npm. It is these edge cases that and these patterns of behavior around them that are hard. It didn't take a huge amount of work to get the basic loading working, but we've got uninstalling them, we've got upgrading them, we've got enabling, disabling them to contend with, we've got dealing with dependencies, we've got ones if they've nested 10 subflows deep within their subflow module. That does work. So you can have a subflow inside a subflow inside a subflow inside a subflow module. Turtles all the way down. But this current challenge is proving quite tricky. But and I think I'm just saying that because it's the current hard problem trying to solve. Given there's a number of different approaches we could take, and they all have hard aspects, I personally, I feel fairly confident we will find the right solution that balances the complexity of implementing it versus the user experience of actually using it. I'd rather have a number of difficult options than seemingly no possible option whatsoever, because then it's just a case of writing enough code to make it work. But that's good. That is good. So to be honest, I'm not sure how much more I can sort of go around in circles trying to explain the problem. Because you very quickly then get into all of the node loading code is it's been written by me. I'm not take full responsibility for this. The way the code is broken up to try and be logical is actually getting in the way, because conceptually there's this registry, like an internal database of nodes, that contains the canonical information about the nodes loaded in the runtime. But that's pretty agnostic of where those nodes have come from, when they were loaded, and all that sort of stuff. It's the data store. We've then got the node loader, which is responsible for actually loading the nodes into the runtime. Given a list of nodes, it loads them into the runtime. And that list of nodes comes from this local file system module, which does the work of scanning the file system to find the modules in the first place. Now, the reason the loader and the local file system got split out in the original design was to try and think about what if nodes could be sought from non-local locations, whatever that may mean. Now, the fact we've never explored that kind of reveals it was kind of possibly a needless bit of architectural design, because there's been absolutely no need to explore what if. But it just means some of the logic is split across 3 different places. When we're loading up a node, we need information about the existing nodes we've got. We need to potentially be able to update to tell someone you have a new dependent. It's causing lots of new connections between these modules, and also there's a slightly different pattern of behavior of loading the nodes when things start up, versus dynamically being installed by the editor. Because when we're starting up and we do the complete scan of the node modules directory and you find all the nodes, we have at that point in time a list of everything we're about to load, so we can instantly check for dependencies and relationships between them. So that's good. But when you're dynamically installing just one, then we haven't got the view of the complete list in the bit of the code that's doing that initial bit of loading. So the fact that this test subflow module introduces a new dependency on node-red, node-random, well, we may have already loaded node-red, node-random because it was already there. Unfortunately, there's, at the moment, no clean route for us to tell node-red, node-random that it's got a new dependent that will stop us from uninstalling node-red, node-random directly. So, yeah, Jim Bob, your question. So when the runtime first starts, can it build a list of installed top-level module? When a node is added and it's not installed as a top-level module, warn the user, install the module so it becomes top-level. So that's... That's kind of the approach when I talk about updating the user's package.json. If we can get into the user's package.json, then npm's not going to remove it unless we explicitly ask for it to be removed. The downside of that approach being, a user installs one Subflow module and it pulls in 10 nodes. They then delete the Subflow. They are left with those 10 nodes in their palette and they have to manually remove them. Now, that having to tidy that up is better than inadvertently deleting something that shouldn't be deleted. But yeah, the search really is, can we just find the right balance for the user experience so that things kind of work as the user expects? And I fully recognize there's going to be a limit to how far we can fully automate this. Again, the challenge comes given the range of users of Node-RED, the different ways it gets used, that we want to try and not do unexpected things. And if a user installs one module and they suddenly find a dozen new nodes in their palette, And rather than just undo that one install, they've now got to manually install everything. That's not an ideal user experience, but it's going to be trade-offs. So can you check? Yeah. So can we? So that's another possible avenue, is that we can certainly set a flag on the node information so the editor knows this node is in the palette because, and only because, it got installed via a subflow. What we then ask the user to do because of that is another question. And what we do with that information is then it leads on to what's the right user experience. Do we tell the user that, say, Node-RED Node Random, you've added Node-RED Node Random to your workspace? I don't know what language we use, what are the words we use to explain that in a way to the user, because for a Node developer used to Node modules, used to npm, there are standard terms we can use that communicates what's going on and they would understand. But again, recognizing our user base is much more varied, and many have little to no experience of npm other than the npm install of Node-RED they had to run at the very beginning. Trying to find the right message that prompts the user to do the right thing is a challenge. So again, it comes back to just trying to make sure the default behavior, the automatic behavior, is the right one. That is always the challenge with Node-RED, of just trying to understand and respect the different user experiences and just the inherent knowledge that our users have of all these different bits that underpin Node-RED. It is a challenge. Like I said, talking through it has kind of helped me think through some of the implications of some of it. Certainly that idea of, if we can get it into the user's package.json file for them, would be a good thing. And if we only do that when they deploy a flow that uses a node from that module, so that if they remove the subflow, we will remove all the other modules that they weren't using with it, and we'll just leave behind the ones they have started using. I think that's an interesting... that is certainly an interesting scenario to see what does it take to actually do that. I've already written some code that keeps track of, is a node known in the package.json or has it been loaded somehow else. So yeah, that's certainly going to be feasible. Again, this is one of the challenges with Node-RED. Because of the number of people who have adopted Node-RED, embedded it in their own systems, put their own flavor around it, I have to be really quite careful with this sort of behavior, that we don't do something that then inhibits some adoption or makes it harder for someone who has already adopted it to pick up, because they may not want quite this behavior. So yeah, there we go. So yeah, I hope that was an interesting talk through of some of the problems, a bit different to other weeks. If this is the first time you've watched me witter through all this all for the last hour or so, I mean, do go look at the archive. Some weeks I do actually write code. Some weeks we do debug stuff together and figure stuff out. This has been a bit more of a show and tell of the Subflow module work that, basically trying to get this done it'd be nice to get it into 1.3, even possibly under a beta flag in 1.3, just to I think this is going to need some pretty broad testing from the community before we formalize it, particularly if an issue is found that requires some modification as to the structure of the subflow module. Do we need a different flag in here, or does the subflow JSON need to take a slightly different structure, that type of thing? Those are some questions we're only going to be able to answer with enough testing and enough real world trial of it. So my gut feel is, depending how we get on between now and late January, when 1.3 is tentatively scheduled for, then this whole feature might have to be behind a feature flag in the settings file. So you have to opt in to be able to install Subflow modules on the basis that certainly in 1.3 it's a experimental feature. And that's something I'd like us to do more of. We've had a few good features we've released. We've done beta periods and then the final release, and that's been great. There have been some features that I would like to have a longer beta period with. And I guess the only way to do that without holding up releases is include them in a release, but put them behind a feature flag so that people can opt into that behavior and see how we get on with see how we get on with better coverage and getting more progress on that. So what else? What other news have I to share this week? So what is going on? So we did maintenance release last week. Got nothing else outstanding from a maintenance standpoint. There have been a few interesting issues crop up, none of which I fancied trying to tackle tonight. Interesting one here around big numbers. So there is a chap has raised this issue that if you have some JSON with very large numbers in, when we parse it, those numbers get modified. And it is just a limitation that JavaScript cannot handle native numbers bigger than whatever, 2 to the power of 53 minus 1. That's the maximum safe integer. They do have the big int type, which supports much bigger precision numbers. And there are custom npm modules that can replace json.parse and give you big int numbers if you need them. But obviously there's a performance cost in doing that because you lose the native performance of json.parse. So yeah, it's one of those, I don't know, do we just say this is a limitation or what? I don't know yet. What I did squeeze into 1.2.4 or 5, the maintenance release we did last week, is the debug sidebar will now display big int numbers if you have them. It didn't used to do that, so that's something nice. There's some unfortunate breakage, it looks like, with the MQTT node. If you're on node 8, which is end of life, you really should not be on node 8 anymore. Oh, that's interesting. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted because I thought this issue hadn't had any more comments, but it looks like it did get more comments at the weekend. Essentially, we upgraded to the latest MQTT module, knowing that they had dropped support for end-of-life node versions, but in our testing, it still worked. Unfortunately, they've recently introduced a change that now breaks on node 8. And yeah, unfortunately, this has only become more. Node 8's not been supported version of Node for 10 months now. So we're dropping support for Node 8 in April with our 2.0 release, but I do fear we're going to get more and more issues where we have to move forward for security reasons, and our hands get somewhat tied. So anyway, interesting issue. One of the problems with us not having dropped Node 8 support sooner. And other stuff. Interesting one on Internet Explorer 11, if there's anyone out there doing anything with IE 11. The download button in the export dialog appears to cause problems. Now, I will say we added the download button for people who explicitly I'm pretty sure they were IE 11 users. So I find it curious for someone to raise an issue saying this is now broken, given the original requirement for us to add that button came from some IE 11 users. So I do need to follow up on that one to find out. After they got us to add the button, why haven't they noticed it's stopped working on IE 11? Or it's something else entirely. And a bunch of other stuff. There's always stuff to do. So, yeah. That's pull request wise, what's going on. There's the Subflow stuff that I showed you about the Subflow module properties pane. There's a bunch of pull requests from our friends at Hitachi updating more of the core nodes to use the new messaging API we introduced in 1.0, so that you can then start using the complete node in conjunction with these nodes. They had raised a PR ages ago, one PR that updated all the core nodes, and it was just proving too big a set of changes to review meaningfully in one go. So sort of doing them node by node now. We've done a lot of them. These outstanding ones just have some behaviors that needed a bit more closer review to make sure they're working. What else is going on? Bart has enhanced the typed input widget so it can be disabled, which is a nice fix. Again, we just need to test that against the different types of typed input we have. So that will be in 1.3. And again, a whole bunch of stuff, although the older these pull requests, it's kind of the long tail, the older they are, they kind of, a pull request has a half-life, and the longer they go unmerged, frankly, the less likely they are to get merged, just because they fall behind and things move on. And so we did a bit of tidying up of some old stuff, but lots more still to do. There we go. Bit of a tour. Like I said, less of a week of writing code and fixing stuff, more of a talk around some of the work I'm doing right now on Subflow Modules. So I hope that was interesting. Like I say, it's not always like this. Some weeks I do actually fix code and write code with you. There's certainly plenty to do. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful as we get more into the 1.3 development stream, there's going to be more and more little bits that are more suited to try and fit into this hour slot. And I'm sure that'll be far more interesting later on. Otherwise, as is traditional, it's just gone 9 o'clock here. I need a cup of tea. I've been talking for an hour. I'm going to sign off. So thank you all for joining. Like I say, if it's your first time watching, thank you for joining. I think, it's always great seeing the viewing figures on the YouTube side. I don't think many people stay to watch the whole hour. I think people tend to dip in and scan through it. So if you've stayed to the bitter end, then do leave a message and say hi. Otherwise, I'll be back on Twitch 8 p.m. next Monday. I will endeavour to have something a bit more meaty and more accessible next week. But, some weeks it is just going to be some of the hard stuff I'm knee deep in that I can't quite pull myself out of in order to do something lighter for the stream. So there we go. Thanks for everyone joining the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, do like and subscribe. And if there's any topics you'd like to see me cover, do leave a message, do let me know. Otherwise, come say hi in Slack, on Discourse, wherever it might be. Otherwise, have a good week, stay safe, and good night. Bye now.